Subcommittee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. Purpose of this hearing is to assess the State Department's compliance with congressional oversight by analyzing the efficiency and transparency between State's Bureau of Legislative Affairs and House Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, before we get going, I will be recognizing Chairman of the full committee for an opening statement and the ranking member of full committee for an opening statement. But before I do so, we have one of our members, Mr. Mills here, who has his 9-year-old, Noah, just had a birthday. You wanna come up and see your dad and have him tell you happy birthday? All right. We'll bring him up here.
Yeah, give him a gavel, man.
So.
Mr. Mills.
Hey, buddy.
Uh-huh.
How you doing?
Happy birthday, buddy.
So you'd be a future chair? He's turning Democrat? I knew it was coming.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Mills. So. Happy birthday, buddy. All right, I'm now going to recognize Chairman McCall for any opening statement he wishes to give.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. And Naz, congratulations on your soon, second child? Oh, boy. This is an oversight hearing. Congressional oversight is a power vested under Article 1 of the Constitution. We take that very seriously. It's part of our system of checks and balances. It's my duty as chairman of this committee to conduct rigorous oversight of the State Department's activities and learn how it's spending America's taxpayers' money. And while I've worked in good faith with the State Department on many matters, I have often found the relationship challenging when it comes to obtaining requested information. And that's why I sent a detailed letter over a month ago to you, Deputy Secretary Verma. That letter reiterated problems we've encountered in investigations related primarily to Afghanistan, to facilitating illegal immigration through northern Mexico, to promoting atheism overseas, and other misguided policies. The 12-page letter received but a single paragraph response. And while I appreciate Secretary Blinken cooperating, working with me to turn over the Afghanistan after action review interview notes, which is very helpful. It's also necessary to talk about some of these other challenges. Secretary Verma, over the course of my investigation, 41% of the documents produced were either heavily redacted or consisted solely of public information available, like the 81 pages here related to Afghanistan, just heavily redacted, as you can see.
No, they're completely.
In fact, I would say almost 100% redacted. It's not very transparent. It's not very honest. I mean, every one of these 80 pages is blacked out. And I think we can do better. We can work together on this for the American people. Beyond Afghanistan, we all remember what happened regarding the suspended security clearance of Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley. The scandal was known at the highest levels of the department, but it was not shared with Congress for more than 2 months. And now it's been over 300 days since the suspension, and we still really have no answers, no details. And as you know, we had to pass a law to ensure that we are notified of things like this in the future. Additionally, I find the department's lack of transparency and timeliness regarding various arms sales disappointing. For 2 years, the State Department has delayed the approval of export licenses for American companies to sell firearms to both the Mexican military and law enforcement to fight the drug cartels. In fact, I was down in Mexico City with the Secretary of the Navy, and they raised this very issue with me and the Mexican Marines. We're the weapons that we paid for. We need them to fight the cartels in Mexico. And they are on the front lines, also trying to keep deadly drugs like fentanyl, not so well, I would say, out of the country. In a time of crisis, we should not be withholding the tools they need to combat these deadly cartels. I hope that moving forward, as an eternal optimist, I hope we can consult better with you, and you can consult better with Congress in the future. It seems to me at the staff level, things get bogged down, and I know this happens with the members of Congress and their respective offices. But when I have a higher level discussion, particularly with the secretary, we try to be more like the adults in the room. We actually get progress and we get things done. But I think in fairness to the secretary and myself, we could avoid a lot of these problems if we could just work it out at the staff level without having to go through, subpoenas and then contempt proceedings, and then finally getting the production that we've sought that we're legally entitled to. And under Article 1, we are entitled to. That is our responsibility. I know, Naz, you worked on the Hill, and that's a responsibility we take very seriously. So anyway, I want to thank the chairman for holding this important hearing and for the great work you're doing on oversight. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here. And I look forward to hopefully a more productive relationship with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman McCall. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you, Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Crow for calling this important hearing. And I want to thank Deputy Secretary Verma and Assistant Secretary Durakoğlu for appearing here today. It is critical that the American people have an understanding of the unprecedented cooperation this committee is receiving from the State Department and its 19 investigations. As the Committee of Jurisdiction for the Department of State, however, I want to also take a moment, especially in light of the committee's hearing earlier this week, assessing the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, to commend the work of the State Department employees around the world who responded in a heroically way to the unprecedented events unfolded in Afghanistan in 2021. From the consulate officers standing side by side their military colleagues at the gates of Hamid Karzai International Airport, or those manning the 24-hour task forces in Washington or at embassies abroad, I really want you to know how important your work helping to facilitate the evacuation in record time of 124,000 people has not gone unnoticed by me. And I want to thank you and the people of the State Department for all of the work and dedication and sacrifices you make on behalf of the United States of America. Now, of course, I have a little difference of opinion of my good friend, the chairman of this committee, on what's been happening with reference to transparency. Throughout this Congress, the State Department under Secretary Blinken has exemplified transparency and cooperation, engaging extensively with the Foreign Affairs Committee's majority oversight demands. To date, the department has facilitated over 18 witnesses for transcribed interviews, amounting to more than 100 hours of testimony and tens of thousands of pages of documents and over 72 productions. I believe this is what compliance looks like. Additionally, the State Department officials have appeared before the committee on a range of topics, including Afghanistan, consular affairs, China, export controls, the Global Engagement Center, and climate change. I also believe this is what compliance looks like. In the few instances where Secretary Blinken has had legitimate concerns about the chilling effect of the majority's request, he has found ways to accommodate Chairman McCall. Again, this is what compliance looks like. Secretary Blinken's compliance is in stark contrast to his immediate predecessor, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who rejected congressional subpoenas issued for him and for the State Department to provide information and testimony to lawmakers, including about the firing of the State Department's Inspector General. The majority's oversight inquiries across committees have yielded no significant findings, no smoking guns, to substantiate allegations of misconduct and lack of transparency. And I believe in responsible oversight, because it is critical. It's a critical component of this committee's work. But it is disheartening to witness the continuous diversion of American taxpayer resources and attention towards baseless, political, motivated investigations. Ironically, the majority's lack of transparency is glaring, and I have continuously called on the majority to release all the transcripts of the closed-door interviews conducted during this Congress. The majority has yet to do so. Now, I appreciate my good friend, the chairman's promise to eventually make them public. Yet, it has been 15 months of sitting on the facts, and it seems to me cherry-picking quotes to mislead the public. House Republicans have a unique ability to almost immediately release transcripts of transcribed interviews when it suits their political narrative, but wait months and still not release the transcripts when it doesn't suit their agenda. Their political agenda has serious consequences, and publicly releasing the name of an organization advocating for the rights of marginalized people, subjecting them to threats and harassments is very dangerous. And allowing a disagreement on policy to drive an investigation into a State Department grant supporting freedom of beliefs is dangerous. And feverishly holding hostage the State Department's ability to counter Russian and Chinese disinformation is, in fact, dangerous. And our duty to the American people is to pursue oversight with integrity and focus on enhancing our national security and governance. The continuous attempts to divide our nation, to erode our public trust in our institutions, and to distract them from real challenges we face lead us nowhere and must again. Again, thank you, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and to our witnesses for your willingness to voluntarily testify in public hearing. I look forward to your insights. Now yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. I now recognize myself for an opening statement, and I'm going to get into the mismanagement of oversight in that. And I'll start by framing it in this way. It's often said that quality is better than quantity, and in your written testimony, which you will likely repeat in a moment, you provide stats of being subject to 38 congressional investigations into State Department from the House of Representatives, responding to 1,300 congressional letters, providing 40,000 pages worth of documents, provided testimony in over 100 hearings, and I thank you for all of that. I thank the State Department for all that you have provided, but unfortunately, it's too often quantity and not quality. And I would give you some examples in this as we move along. We have classified briefers frequently come with little or no answers to our questions or with absolutely nonsensical analysis. The documents are often just simply not what is requested. When I requested the plan to withdraw from Afghanistan, specifically the circumstances of withdrawal that we were going through at that time, I was not sent at all a plan on what we were doing with that withdrawal of Afghanistan, but rather I was sent thousands of pages that generally outlined how we would evacuate from any embassy, which was absolutely not what we were requesting, and that's well known, not how we planned to leave in that moment. This in turn results in an additional 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 requests. So when you look at the number of how many requests you get for inquiry, it's because you're responding to us with something that is not the answer to our original request, essentially making it a dog and pony show. You're getting, if you're upset about getting too many inquiries from Congress, because the quality of what you are sending us is poor quality. And moreover, the quality of the foreign policy is poor, and that is also why you are getting additional inquiries. That is what requires us to ask so many questions. That is why there are 38 separate investigations from the House of Representatives into the State Department. Some of the poor policies resulting in many inquiries include these, but would not be limited to these, but these certainly, I think, by most people's rationale for common sense, warrant investigation. Number one, I mentioned it already, the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, with thousands being left behind and those that are still there. That warrants investigation, and it warrants inquiries. Sorry if that's an inconvenience. Picking 9/11 as an exit date for the withdrawal of Afghanistan. That requires inquiries, requests for explanation, and unfortunately we've had requests for explanation and requests for witnesses go unanswered. Restarting funding to UNRWA after President Trump cut that off. That requires explanation. Taking the Houthis off of the foreign terrorist organization list requires answers. Having to revoke the special representative for Iran, Mr. Robert Malley, his security clearance, that requires investigation. Funding drag shows in Ecuador. That requires response from you all. When the State Department goes out there and does that, we deserve answers for why you would fund drag shows in Ecuador with the dollars of we the people. Building a port in Gaza or proposing to build a port in Gaza, that requires answers. Giving billions to Iran, giving aid to the Taliban. Hiring people at State Department because of their skin color or sexual orientation. When you do that, that requires answers. Flying a rainbow flag over the embassy of the Vatican, that requires answers. When you go out there and you limit U.S. energy export potential while advancing foreign energy export potential, that requires answers. Funding LGBTQ activist groups supporting prostitution in Colombia. Yeah, we want answers to that. When the ambassador of France is replacing paintings of the founders to replace them with paintings of transgender activists, that requires answers. And treating foreign aid like it's charity instead of a transaction, like sending $500,000 grant to Nepal to advance atheism, that requires answers. And I want to examine that aid to Nepal to advance atheism there of $500,000. And I apologize, I am going to go over the 5 minutes here, but I'll make sure to reciprocate the time to you if you desire it. In April, this is a long list of actions, and you can count on the fact that we're going to get into this in questions. I want to talk about the stonewalling that has taken place. In April 2021, a notice of funding went out that purports to use American tax dollars to expand atheist networks in the Middle East or South Asia. Then in 2022, June 30th, 2022, we sent a letter to State Department requesting information on this grant. Later in 22, we had not gotten a response, so we sent another letter. Fast forward into the next year, Chairman McCall sent another letter with questions asking for the production of documents. That would be number 3. Then you go later into 2023, HVAC staff emailed the department staff, your department staffs, to reiterate that its request be attended to expeditiously. That would be attempt number 4 after several requests had been sent. Move into September of 23, absent any correspondence, documents or written answers from the department or even acknowledgement of the other emails, HVAC staff emailed the department requesting an update on the status. That would be attempt number 5. Go into later of 23, absent any correspondence, documents, or written answers from the department. Again, sent an email and a correspondence requesting information. Fast forward into October. Department staff emailed HVAC, noting that it has now finalized a new production in response to this inquiry, but refused to produce documents until it received an assurance, quote, an assurance from HVAC regarding the department's serious concerns that information will be properly protected. I don't know that there should be a proper protection about atheist grants in Nepal, where we should not be allowing the American people to know what's going on there, but that was the response. October 19, 23, HVAC staff emailed department staff requesting state to produce all requested documents and schedule transcribed interviews. That was contact number 7. Move on to later in October, state made its first document production. 20 October 2023, first document production. Later, HVAC staff emailed department staff acknowledging receipt of the production, but noted that it did not include the documents that we know to be in State Department's possession. That was contact number 8 on one $500,000 issue. Go later, October 27, 23, department staff called HVAC staff director expressing alarm over transcribed interview requests of career State Department staff in the atheism grant matter. Not sure why that's a problem, but that's what you corresponded with us on. November, department staff emailed HVAC staff stating that it would immediately get to work on providing detailed answers to our questions. And contact number 9, we emailed you all noting that we have already submitted questions that have never been answered. Go on to a couple last contacts here. November 15 of 23, department staff emailed HVAC staff noting that the answers are being drafted and reviewed to provide information. November 16 of 23, HVAC staff emailed noting that today is the deadline and we cannot extend that deadline and we still haven't received the information. That was contact number 10. And November 28, 23, state failed to send proposed dates for transcribed interviews of these senior bureau officials. That's one example of one grant for $500,000 that I think most people would agree is absolutely a ridiculous use of the monies of we the people of the United States of America. Many of our questions did not get answered until this actually took place. The questions didn't get answered until HVAC staff were actually in Nepal, and while in Nepal, sought out the answers. It should not be faster to get answers from Kathmandu than from just down the road in Foggy Bottom. We expect better from the State Department, and we expect to hear specific answers from you on how you plan to do better starting immediately. In that, I apologize for going over my time, and I now recognize Ranking Member Crow for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you, Chairman Mast. Thank you for calling this important hearing. And I appreciate the opportunity to look holistically at the department's responsiveness to congressional oversight over the course of this Congress. As the ranking member of the Oversight Subcommittee, I have tracked these investigations closely, and I am thankful to Secretary Blinken and to the department for their cooperation and for their respect for Congress's constitutional oversight role. I believe the department's track record demonstrates their compliance and shows that they have made good faith effort to meet the majority's many requests. But there are differences between a good faith oversight effort, of which we have an obligation to pursue, in which you start with a question, right? The way investigations are supposed to happen is you start with a question, and then you collect evidence, you hold hearings and briefings, you collect evidence and you look at documents, and then you come to a conclusion based on that investigation. Versus in these instances where the majority starts with an answer, something that they want to show, and then they work backwards from there to try to jam the facts in to meet their narrative. But the good news is we have facts, and I love facts because they show really interesting things. There are 19 investigations that this committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, under the majority control, has initiated this Congress. 12 of those are deemed active. There have been 72 productions of documents and information in response to those investigations. And when we printed this board, there were 22,000 pages, but because you continue to comply and do things on a rolling basis, as of today, there are over 24,000 pages of documents now provided to this committee. 18 witnesses for transcribed interviews, and over 100 hours of testimony. That is a lot. And I can also say, that's been told to me by the State Department, there have been over 50,000 staff hours spent by staff of the State Department responding to the inquiries of this committee. But the chairman is also right that quality is important too, right? It's not just the quantity, but also what is being provided. And he used an example. He said, we asked for information about the withdrawal of Afghanistan, and what we got was policies pertaining to embassies and withdrawals. Well, folks, we have policies in the United States government and procedures that apply to our government. You know, we're military folks by background, and there are standard operating procedures that we're familiar with in our military background that apply in every given instance. So to say that producing those policies is non-compliance is absurd, to be generous. The administration has accommodated every request for transcribed interviews in the investigation into the Afghanistan withdrawal and provided more than 16,000 pages of documents just for that one investigation. The administration has also gone to great lengths to meet unprecedented requests that implicate really serious concerns of whistleblower protections, chilling effect, including coming up with a new process to share with this committee the dissent cable channel and interview notes related to the after-action review of the Afghanistan withdrawal, recognizing the importance of this investigation and going to great lengths to accommodate the requests of this committee. In those instances, the department clearly communicated their concerns, and Secretary Blinken made extraordinary accommodations. But rather than a transparent and serious investigation, this committee itself actually has not been transparent on many occasions and has not released the transcripts of the many transcribed interviews that we have conducted, which we have repeatedly asked for. We have nothing to hide. The administration has nothing to hide. So let's produce the transcripts, because the American people deserve to have these answers too. But here's fundamentally what's happening here. The majority disagrees with the policies of this administration. That's the way it works. There are elections in America. People win those elections, and they implement their policies. So, a policy disagreement does not equal obstruction. A policy disagreement does not equal noncompliance. You can disagree, and we're supposed to have debates about these policies and these programs. Let's have those debates, but do not say that there's obstruction, that they're not working with us in good faith, because they have over and over again proven their willingness to do this. And you know, with all due respect for the chairman, who's my brother in arms and a fellow combat veteran, in his parade of horribles, one of which he spent a lot of time on was this atheism, the supposed atheism grant that the State Department administered. Well, here's the fact, folks. This grant promotes fundamental rights of freedom of religion. And guess where this grant comes from? It is a grant program that's in direct response to a statutory amendment by, wait for it, a Republican member of this committee that created this program. Facts matter. I look forward to having a fact-based discussion in this hearing, and I appreciate the witnesses for coming forward to answer yet another series of questions by the majority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. And we will now go to the individuals for your opening statements. First, we have the Honorable Richard Verma, Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. Next, we have the Honorable Naz Durakoğlu, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Legislative Affairs, which is commonly referred to as H. Thank you both for being here today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask that you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. And I now recognize Deputy Secretary Verma for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Chairman McCall, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Meeks, Ranking Member Crow, and members of the committee. I'm honored to testify before you today regarding State Department compliance with congressional oversight. I'm joined by our Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, Naz Durakoğlu, who many of you know well and who previously served as a staff member of this committee. I'm proud to say that both the Assistant Secretary and I have roots on Capitol Hill, where we served for many years. In fact, I started working in this chamber when I was 18 years old for the then chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, Jack Murtha, and I continued working for him through college and law school. There was no better training on the critical bipartisan role that Congress plays in the shaping and oversight of U.S. national security and foreign policy. I went on to serve in the Air Force and in the Senate as the National Security Advisor to the Senate leader for many years, and then as the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. The Assistant Secretary and I have enormous respect and deep appreciation for the role that this committee plays in supporting the department and our nearly 80,000 State Department personnel spread in every corner of the world and every conflict zone. Our U.S. direct hire workforce comes from every state in the country, and nearly 20% of our workforce are veterans. My role as Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, or DMR as the position is known, has been described as the Chief Operating Officer for the State Department. Next week will be 1 year on the job for me. It's been an enormous honor to return to the department after serving as the Assistant Secretary and as U.S. Ambassador to India. In this first year, I've been to over 30 of our embassies and consulates around the world, from Kyiv to Baghdad, Jakarta, Sydney, Bogota, Jerusalem, the Western Indian Ocean Islands, and so many places in between. Ours is a department facing an unprecedented set of strategic challenges, from the war in Ukraine to conflict in the Middle East to the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China, not to mention the transnational challenges brought on by climate change, health and food insecurity, democratic retrenchment, cyber risks, and of course, migration. Our personnel are working in more places on a wider range of issues of urgent importance to the American people than ever before. This is the nature of the global picture we face. But what I've also discovered in my travels and my engagements with the workforce is a deeply committed and inspired team who are putting mission above all else. I know many of you on this committee engage with them too on your travels, and I'm sure you've seen the same, and we are grateful for your support. The global landscape puts into perspective the urgency of our jobs, the need to support our people in their missions, and the need to work closely with all of you on policy development, on oversight, and on appropriations. And I'm pleased to be able to say that under Secretary Blinken and with the leadership from the Assistant Secretary, the department has reached record levels of engagement with Capitol Hill. Since the beginning of the 118th Congress, department officials have provided more than 3,500 briefings to members of Congress and their staffs, testified in more than 100 congressional hearings, responded to more than 1,300 congressional letters, and facilitated more than 650 CODELs and staff tells. And while these numbers are impressive, our relationship with Congress is more than just hearings and briefings. We have particularly demonstrated that commitment in our response to congressional oversight. By our count, Mr. Chairman, there were actually 45 investigations by the House. There are some 34 that are ongoing today of the department, 19 from this committee alone. This is on top of the many staff level or more informal requests for information we receive on a daily basis. In response, the department has produced nearly 42,000 pages worth of documents to Congress since January 2023. Of that number, more than half has gone to this committee. The department has also made 18 employees available for transcribed interviews with this committee's staff, with each interview lasting as long as 8 or 9 hours, and 2 more are scheduled. However, global threats and foreign policy challenges do not cease when we are responding to congressional oversight. The same officers who are subject matter experts also have to review every document that gets produced to the committee, and they take that responsibility quite seriously. And while we've increased our staffing for congressional oversight, the department's primary function must remain the conduct of American foreign policy. I'm grateful for the open channels of communication we've had with all of you, and I'm hoping we can find the right balance in the months ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Verma. I ask unanimous consent that the following member be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in today's hearing. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne. Without objection, so ordered. All right, we're now going to move to member questions. Thank you for your opening statement. I understand that you will not be doing one, Mr. Durakoğlu. That's correct. Okay. We're going to move to Mr. Perry, number 1, for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't intend to head this direction, but at least will for a moment. And I appreciate, first of all, let me say thank you for your service, and Secretary Verma, particularly in uniform, as there's some other formerly uniformed service members here as well. But it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. And I'm looking at these documents, and it's a pretty thick stack of documents, but now, you both have pretty high education here. As I looked at your resume, can either of you read anything on this page? Or this page? Or any of these pages that all look the same? That came from you folks to us. Now, I know it's probably a lot of work providing all this information to us. You worked here on the Hill, both of you did, before at some point in your career. And you know it's our job to do this, and while we do have policy disagreements, and they are to be expected based on the outcome of elections, we need the information so that we can do our job, because even though the executive branch is making these decisions on executing the law, we're the ones that make the law, as you know that, and we need to make sure that the law is being executed as designed. That having been said, I want to ask you folks about Robert Malley. I think it's been about 300 days. The chairman of the full committee mentioned it. It's my understanding that he is under investigation and that he has had his security clearance revoked. Now, correction, suspended. Will either one of you speak to that? Is the investigation still ongoing? Has the security clearance been revoked? What level of security clearance are we talking about that he has maintained? Is there a designator with that? Is there SCI? Is there L? Is there Q? Is there white? Where do we stand?
Yeah, Congressman, I will say the matter's still under review. There's not a lot we can say in this public setting. Frankly, I don't have the information to share with you because it's under review. And I'm hoping we can get to a point where we can actually provide you with more information, but as long as it's under review, there isn't a lot to provide to you. And I think you have it basically right. The security clearance is pending.
So,
adjudication.
Mr. Secretary, you're an attorney, right? I think I read that. You're an attorney. You're familiar with the Supreme Court. You know that they've held that even ongoing law enforcement cases cannot limit the committee's power to conduct its own inquiries. And I can give you the case. I'm sure you're familiar. But it seems like it is limiting our ability right now because you won't tell. So do you know what level clearance he had?
I don't know what level.
Which,
clearance he had. Yeah.
you don't know which level. Were all levels suspended or just, how familiar are you with the case? And if you're not familiar, should you be as the Deputy Secretary?
No, what happens, and Congressman, what I understand is that the Undersecretary for Management and the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security actually came up in closed session and did brief the chairman and ranking member. Pursuant, because of privacy restrictions, because of the law that you cite, we were able to provide some details, but we can't do it in open session. So we provided some administrative details. Again, probably not enough to satisfy you or the committee members today. And I understand your concern, but that's the limitations we're operating under.
So there are other members on the committee here that have the same level of security clearance. Is there a commitment from your office? We don't want to take you away from your work, but we need to know this information, understanding, and maybe the public doesn't know, but we're talking about someone who I think can potentially be credibly accused of assisting and aiding the enemy of the United States of America in Iran, having regular contact and so on and so forth. Would you commit to a closed-door setting, a closed session with the other members of this committee for that information?
Yeah, let me say two things. One, I'd be careful about just jumping to conclusions like that.
I'm not jumping to any conclusions so I can read.
Well, I think you are. And secondly, I'd be happy to take that back and provide you with whatever administrative information we can and consistent with what the law allows us. But yes, let me take it back.
So can you tell us what the circumstances were, how the department became aware of the allegations surrounding Mr. Malley?
I actually don't have that information, Congressman. I will say I understand we have offered a full committee briefing, and so that offer stands.
And we want more than just your administrative details, sir. It's been 300 days plus.
Congressman, we'll do whatever we are able to do given the pending nature of the investigation.
All right, Mr. Chairman, time's expired. You.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Crow.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Verma, just picking up where we left off there at the last line of questioning, it's true that the State Department has actually provided information to this committee on this issue, this security clearance issue regarding Mr. Malley. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And including a classified briefing with members. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In which all the information available to the department at that time that they can release with the restrictions of a personnel issue, because there are protections, human resources protections about what can be transmitted during the pendency of an ongoing investigation, but notwithstanding those restrictions, you've let us know what you all know.
That's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Durakoğlu, I want to talk to you about Afghanistan for a minute because you have been at the department for a while and you saw firsthand the issues of Afghanistan around the withdrawal. Could you just paint a picture for us for a moment as to what it was like within the State Department when that was happening? and how you've taken that experience and translated that to, our very real needs to do oversight and investigations and ask questions about it.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your service as well. You're right. I was at the department during the withdrawal, and I was tasked with essentially receiving input from congressional offices. And I have to say the input was quite heavy. There were a lot of folks seeking assistance at the time. I happened to, for outside reasons, found myself in Turkey at the time. So I was actually closer to the time zone in Afghanistan. So the role that I ended up playing was calling up our officers on the ground and getting information from them about which gates were open, what was going on that day, so that I can then transmit it to Congress. I was in touch with the staff directors of this committee and others quite regularly. And the one thing I could say is I wasn't on the ground. I have immense respect for those both at DOD and State Department who were. When I regularly spoke to officers who actually were personal contacts of mine from my time in Congress, I would hear gunshots in the background. I would hear screaming. They would talk to me through it. They would actually try to locate individuals that certain congressmen and women were looking for. And oftentimes the cell phones that they were using, they would pass right to the Marines that they were working with side by side as well. So I will say it was a very difficult time, I think, for all of us, including those on this committee. But I have to say the department was really doing everything it could, and I have immense respect, particularly for those who volunteered to go to Kabul.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, I mentioned in my opening this issue of some unprecedented requests in the department, making accommodation on those. Can you talk about, for example, the descent channel cable issue and how that came about, and some of the substantial accommodations the department made in responding to that request?
Sure. So as you probably know, Secretary Blinken was actually before this committee, and he explained it himself. But there are obviously extreme sensitivities to sharing the descent channel cable. This is a confidential channel directly to the Secretary. The employees who participate in this, on whatever issue they may participate in, they expect it to remain confidential for the most part. So when the request came in for the descent channel, and I will say the dissent actually originally was from Democrats on the committee back when they were in the majority. We talked to the committee about providing briefings. This was even before 2023. There were briefings provided, and then post-2023, we provided a summary of the descent channel cable, which actually took direct input from that cable. We had our professionals who know about the descent channel come up here and in a closed setting discuss what the input is, answer any questions. And then eventually we did provide it in camera as well. And this was, I would say, an extraordinary accommodation. It's never actually been done before in the history of the State Department.
Thank you. And in the time that we have, it's my understanding that the Senate minority, the Republicans in the Senate, are actually holding up some ambassador appointments based on investigations that the majority in the House are conducting on certain issues based on policy disagreements. Can you just, talk to me very briefly about that in some instances of those important appointments being held up?
I have to think a little bit through this, but I can say one person who's notably absent today is our legal advisor, who obviously the L Bureau plays a big role in accommodations and the oversight process as well. The department hasn't had a legal advisor since the beginning of this administration, which is quite extraordinary. Our first nominee had to withdraw, and we have a second nominee who recently had her hearing and was voted out yesterday. But I will say it was against the will of the minority, and she will be on the floor. This is someone who plays a big role. I will say Ecuador was mentioned a few times. We don't have our nominee to Ecuador moving forward. We also talked, I don't know if we mentioned it, but I know a major focus of this committee is the Bureau of Democracy, Rights, and Labor. The administration has gone without an assistant secretary for that bureau since the beginning as well. Also, we had a nominee who was forced to withdraw, actually forced not to proceed, and we now have a second one too who we're hoping to lead the bureau. But I will say across the board, we have just dozens of folks who are waiting, mostly career officials, and I don't know if the deputy secretary would like to comment on that.
It's just, it's hard to carry out the mission that I think this committee wants us to carry out when we don't have our chief of mission in Djibouti, in Nigeria, at the African Union, in Ecuador, in Haiti. We didn't have an ambassador until we had to have a cloture vote on the Senate floor. I know this isn't your challenge, and it's the other chamber, but when you are frustrated with the department and our inability to really move big policy initiatives or protect people, we've got to get our people out in the field, and this really should be a bipartisan concern. You look at every commission after every crisis in the United States, 9/11 commission forward, they talk about getting our people out in the field as quickly as possible, including in the after action review for Afghanistan. They talked about the absence of Senate-confirmed people in top jobs. So I think as a bipartisan matter, I hope we can look at this a bicameral matter, frankly, because it impacts U.S. national security.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. I would say, I think what makes it most difficult, bad policy is difficult to defend. And I would say that, I'm glad you spoke about Afghanistan. It does matter to have answers to your questions in a timely way. The withdrawal being in August, I was here in this room asking questions in March prior to the withdrawal, and I asked 3 very specific questions. How many SIVs were they anticipating? How many when you count each of their family members? And how many staff did State Department have working on that? State did not have the answer. State promised to get us the answer, never got us the answer. And we know that right now to this moment, there was no attempt to get that answer for us, and people are still running for their lives. That's the result of what happens when you all don't get us the answer. That's not a question right now, Mr. Verma. I will have my time to ask questions. Right now, I'm going to recognize Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. Deputy Secretary Verma, great to meet you in person. We've exchanged some phone calls and texts. One of the things that one of my colleagues and also my fellow brother in Combat Arms, Mr. Crow, has said is that start with a question, get the facts. So I'm going to start with a question. In August of 2021, President Biden made a comment and said that if you just show your blue passport at HKIA, that you'll be permitted to enter and allowed on the aircraft. Is that correct?
Well, I think you know, Congressman, what was happening in August of 2021 at that airport and how dangerous it was.
Deputy
And
Secretary, we are not debating at all. I completely agree with you that it was chaotic. I completely agree with
so
you.
we
I
got
just want to
out
know, did he make
we
that
got out
statement?
124,000 people,
make that
including
statement, sir?
6,000 Americans, and the
Deputy
ability to
Secretary,
show a blue
this
passport
is
was
how
very
things get
challenging.
taken out of context and start getting heated up. It's just a simple yes or no. Did President Biden make that comment or not?
I don't know. I wasn't at the department at the time, frankly. And
Do you happen to remember, because he made it clear, if you're a blue passport holder and you show your passport at the gate, that you'd be permitted to enter. That was in a direct quote.
Sir, my apologies. We were taking a lot of intake at that time. I actually don't remember the president's comments on that. I just
Understood.
don't.
Well, he did actually make that comment. And if you will, can you just roll a piece of video first? Because that starts with my question. Now let's get to the fact. It's actually going to be the one on Afghanistan. Oh, you guys don't have that one. Okay. There was blue passport holders sitting outside on August 26th of 2021.
Mr. Mills, will you pause for a moment? We could pause the time. We have whatever video you want? We can
Do we
check
have that
for
other
a minute.
videos?
Just pause
they-
this time
I
for a
don't think they
moment.
brought that one in, unfortunately.
No, you sure?
Too many actual videos to be entered into record. But I would request to be entered into record, Mr. Chairman, the video
ordered.
of Americans waving their passport August 26th of 2021 outside of the Abbey Gate, not being permitted entry, and subsequently losing their lives and being blown into the canal. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on. We talk about facts all the time. We talk about what actually took place and what occurred. Secretary Verma and I have actually discussed the idea that we have a policy and a budgeting issue when it comes to being responsive to Americans that are abroad. But I want to figure out how it is that private citizens and others are able to do things that the whole of government and its entire power is unable and unsuccessful in being able to do. And I want to provide a couple of examples. So here's the first one. which is a mother and 3 children born and raised Amarillo, Texas natives that Congressman Ronnie Jackson out of Texas 13 had requested State Department assistance and support for, and as a Rear Admiral had requested support from the Department of Defense and was denied and not even given any ability to try and get this family into the HKIA area when they were sitting at the gate. And the actual guard said that the only thing the State Department has to do is even say your name over the actual comms, and we will permit you in. Task Force Afghanistan said that we cannot provide that level of assistance, to say their name. But that's okay. After 11 days and multiple attempts by the State Department and others to thwart our efforts, which we came to find, that's that family successfully rescued by myself and my team. Now let's look at other examples of this. In October 7th, we had the barbaric and horrendous incidents in Israel. We requested support from the U.S. State Department to help to get charter aircrafts in, even after Germany, the Philippines, and other nations had come in and successfully arranged that through Ben Gurion Airport. Yet, where was the U.S. State Department? Well, I can tell you where I was on October 11th, that I pulled out the first 32 Americans, October 12th, when I pulled out the next 45 Americans, going into Nazareth, Haifa, going into Jerusalem, going into the West Bank, going into other areas of Israel, getting out 255 before the State Department and all its might and all of its finances even got a single charter aircraft. Now let's go to one more recent incident, an example. The spokesperson, Mr. Miller, of the U.S. State Department made a comment about Haiti and its current disheveled capability of Jimmy Chabrier, which is known as barbecue, taking over with Mencken Khan, G9, and the rest of the actual gangs who have terrorized and set fire and cannibalized individuals. And when requesting support, the spokesman for the State Department said, we have no plan and or intent to help evacuate and secure Americans. Well, at my own dime and expense, once again, here we go. And here's an example. We'll go ahead and play of what that looks like. These are Americans who had requested multiple times from the U.S. State Department to gain assistance to be able to get them from their actual orphanage, to include the gentleman Mitch Albom, a very well-known author and radio host, who, by the way, is a known and well-registered Democrat. You see, when we care about the safety and security of Americans, we don't look at political affiliations or gender or race or religion or other things which are other descript. We care that they're a blue passport holder and that's supposed to matter. We went on to not only rescue them, but to also rescue 13 more after that, to include a 2-month-old baby and a 3-year-old little girl who had been hiding and locking themselves in a chapel. Now, I'm puzzled at how the President of the United States and the United States DOS is telling us that they don't have the ability to help and rescue these Americans when private citizens with limited resources can achieve these great feats. And there's other organizations who are doing amazing things. So we can't talk about how the State Department's main objective abroad is to help support and to rescue and to help those abroad in every way, because we've seen time and time again the failures that have occurred. And we see this through the multitude of NEOs that are occurring, through the failed domestic and foreign policies that's leading up to this, to the Americans that are being banned. There's a pattern of abandonment that is existing right now and no confidence in our own government, which is why Americans feel more secure calling private companies than they do actually responding to the U.S. State Department, who does what? Sends them an automatic email and a website. Please go ahead and fill out. But guess what? The good thing is you do get shamed into your jobs, because now all of a sudden you had no intent, no purpose, or no plan to rescue Americans. Now you're sending a charter. That's what it takes to get the State Department to do their jobs. And that's unacceptable. So you need to let us know the resources, assets, and what needs to be done, because we're willing to help that, but we get nothing from you in return. With that, I yield back, and thank you for indulging my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Chair now recognizes Ms. Titus.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that? Or?
Certainly you may.
Yeah, look, over the past 12 months, State Department's helped 70,000 Americans, 70,000 around the world, not 1 or 2 or 9 or 10, 70,000. We evacuated 1,200 people.
Are you alluding that the 1 or 2 lives don't matter?
No, I'm giving you the quantity
Okay.
and scale of what we've done. We took out 1,200 people from Sudan at great risk. Our consular officers.
I actually commended you on Sudan. Do you remember this?
Mr.
I didn't,
Verma
I
is
didn't see
currently
that.
recognized.
I appreciate that. We took out thousands of people, offered up thousands of seats on charter aircraft from Israel. We are taking people out of Haiti. I appreciate what you've done, Congressman, but I think to demean the department the way you do, I think doesn't reflect the reality.
But it's not demeaning, it's providing facts. Isn't that what Mr. Crow had just talked about, was
look, these
posing a question and
people-
getting
these-
facts?
these
There were
people-
people
these-
asking and begging for help.
Sorry. These
Mr. Mills.
these consular officers are doing incredibly heroic work.
And I love what the State Department's
Mr.
doing. I
Verma
admire
and Mr.
them.
Mills, hold on a minute. Mr. Mills, I'm happy to do a second round. If you have more questions, Mr. Verma, you can continue.
No, I think look, I'd love to work with you the budget that you all passed out of here last fall was a 25% cut to the State Department. 25% cut while you're asking us to take on evacuation responsibilities of Americans. We do so much to warn Americans where they're going. Haiti has been a level 4 country where we actually tell people not only not to go, but if you go, our ability to get you out is going to be limited. So I'm looking forward to this conversation with you. I hope we can support the budget to allow us to do things in a more robust way.
Ms. Titus, you are recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to the subject of the investigations that we were mentioning earlier so that the public knows exactly what the Republicans on this committee want you to be investigating. A department grant support for at-risk members of the LGBTQ community in Latin America. And as was pointed out, this investigation derailed the implementation of this grant after grantees were publicly targeted by members of the House who had voted for the assistance in the first place. That's sending some mixed signals, I would say, by the people across the aisle. The majority is also investigating the State Department for following a law that was passed in 2016 that directs you to support advocates for religious freedom. And now the majority is threatening these partners with subpoenas if they don't sit for transcribed interviews. Again, a law passed in 2016, you're doing what the law said, religious freedom. Surely they support religious freedom. The majority's also opened an investigation that's been weaponized against diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. They refuse to acknowledge that diversity is one of our strengths, that perhaps we should allow people with disabilities greater access. I can't believe they want to come out and oppose to that, but that's the tenor of things in their investigations. They refuse to acknowledge that this is a good thing as opposed to something that they want to get rid of, equity, inclusion, and diversity. They've also held so many hearings on Afghanistan, one this week and one today. This hearing is kind of devolving into that. There's been no new information, no smoking gun after all of these hearings. There are 11 other investigations that they are pursuing at the expense of our time and the public's taxpayer dollars that range from the Wuhan Institute to John Kerry. They want to investigate John Kerry now. In response, I just want to say this again, even though it's been already pointed out, the State Department has turned over 24,000 pages of documents, produced 18 witnesses for transcribed interviews, 100 hours of testimony, 23 closed-door interviews, which we can't get access to. That's all in, I think you said 50,000 staff hours, all in response to these requests for investigations. You mentioned the cutting of the budget last time. Well, this time in the budget that's just come out, or the bill that we're going to be considering, there's another 6% cut to the State Department. How they expect you to do all of this and deal with international diplomacy at the same time is beyond me, and now they want to cut 6% from the budget. And what do they have to show for it? Absolutely nothing. We've not seen any transcripts. We hadn't heard the closed-door interviews. There are no new facts, new damning substance that's been uncovered. It's just more performative politics. And in true to their fashion, the way they've been operating, if you can't find a smoking gun, then you just blow smoke. And that's what we've been hearing. So just put all that out there again. Don't hesitate to make that a part of the record, because that's what's going on here. But I want to talk specifically about the Global Engagement Center. That's something that's under investigation by this committee. Not a surprise. I'd like to ask unanimous consent, too, to put this article in the record. It was in the Washington Post opinion, "Don't defund the fight against Russia and China's disinformation." Y'all are probably familiar with that. One of the things that's pointed out in here is that China spends $7 billion or more annually. Russia spends about $1.5 billion annually, and we're having a hard time getting around 61 million, million with an M and their billion with a B. But anyway, according to this article and to my research and some of the things that you've had to say, we need this agency. We should not be giving up the battle to misinformation. This agency is not something that combats disinformation internally, but abroad. And so I'd like for y'all to talk about it and talk about what the implications are of failing to reauthorize this agency so that we can, stand up for democracy as Russia and China try to conduct this hidden or secret war against us through their sources of disinformation. Would you address that?
And before you do so, I wanted to make sure that Ms. Titus's request for entry into record was recognized.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crow.
So, Congresswoman, thank you for raising the Global Engagement Center. As you point out, it is a battle in the information space. Our adversaries are not sitting back. They are spending billions of dollars. They are trying to shape the battlefield in the information space. And if we're not there pushing back, if we're not there exposing what they're doing, it not only sets us back, it sets our partners and our allies around the world and really puts us at risk. So we appreciate that the Global Engagement Center has been designated as the point and the lead for the federal government to be out there exposing and giving people the tools to actually push back. They do absolutely no work in the United States at all. And they do have a sunset clause at the end of this year. I think it's vitally important that the Global Engagement Center also be reauthorized.
I agree with that. And just a simple yes or no, so there's no question about it. The Global Engagement Center does not conduct domestic-focused programming. Is that correct?
They conduct no work in the United States at all.
And in this investigation that they're conducting about this center, have you been forthcoming in letting them know what some of your implementing partners are doing, who they are, and how they're engaged?
100%.
Thank you, Ms. Titus.
Oh, okay. Is my time up? Seems like my time's a lot shorter than your time. But thank you.
I think you're at a minute 50 over. Isn't that about the same?
I'll go back.
So I certainly tried my best to make it as even as I could here. And thank you for your questions. And Mr. Verma, I do know that as we're speaking about the GEC, there were absolutely domestic news outlets that were targeted by GEC resources. So let's not pretend as though that didn't happen. That 100% happened.
I don't know, is this a question? Because I'm happy to respond to it, because it really was.
It's not a question. We already did a hearing on it with people that are experts on it.
It was I think you're concerned about one of their grantees, but they have strict
I now
guidelines.
recognize Ms. Salazar for her time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this time. And thank you, Mr. Verma, for being here and willingly answer our questions. I just want to help me. I want you to help me with just basically one thing, which is to be able to obtain all communications between the United States Embassy in Cuba and a small business called Madwoman. And I'm going to explain to you why. It occurs that the United States Embassy has hired this company called Madwoman that is supposedly in the hands of private sector in Cuba, something that is very difficult to believe, but that's the way they call themselves, the MIPYMES. Small business, Cubans owning their own small businesses. It occurs that the owner of this small business called Madwoman fires one of her employees called Alvaro Hernandez, just for the mere fact of writing in his own social media, "Down with the dictatorship." The owner was honored by the State Department. Your State Department is one of the top entrepreneurs of the hemisphere. She's invited to come to Washington. And as I said, she's doing business with the United States Embassy to do some type of marketing on the island. At the same time, this company, Madwoman, the offices are in a building which is owned by the Cuban regime and specifically the military conglomerate. So that's why I sent a letter to President Biden, and I copied Secretary Blinken. So we could understand what's happening between the embassy and Madwoman, and the only way we could do that is if we could have all communication, emails, texts, phone calls, letters, between the embassy and Madwoman. Basically, my question is, could you commit to give us by April 1st, as I asked President Biden and Secretary Blinken to offer that information to us? Do you think that you could commit to help me do that?
Sure, Congresswoman. I haven't seen your letter. I'm happy to follow up with you after this hearing. If you want to give me a copy of the letter, I'm happy to take it back and work on it right away.
And you said that means that you would be willing to dedicate resources from the State Department and put some interest in providing to my office all types of communication.
I am happy to dig into this on your behalf. I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry.
No, I understand that you don't. That's why but you are third in command. You can definitely put some resources that are at your disposal to look more into this, because I sent the letter a few months ago, back in February, and I have not received any type of response. And it's important because I'm sure that you don't want anyone to be breaking the law. There is an embargo against Cuba. We do not want to be spending taxpayers' money on hiring companies that are close to the regime, right? No, we want to help those Cubans that do want to be part of a free market economy.
Yes, I can commit to you that we will take this and look into it and come back to you right away.
Thank you very much. I take your word for it. Okay. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar. And I would also point out, because it's been brought up numerous times about the transcribed interviews from Afghanistan, that those have begun to be delivered. And what is being redacted from them is what the minority requested to be redacted from them. That's part of what's taking the time. So some of them have been delivered already, and they are working to be delivered.
Meaning delivered to the minority staff
Delivered
for
to the
review,
minority staff,
but not
that's correct.
yet released, yes.
So, yes. To say that again in the affirmative, they are being delivered to the minority staff. Some have been delivered already. I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. And I want to start by going to what I spoke about in length in my opening comments, $500,000 grant to Nepal regarding the expansion of atheism. And I would just start with this question from senior State Department personnel. Do you believe that that is an appropriate use of $500,000 of We the People to expand atheism in Nepal?
Mr. Chairman, I've actually looked at this. I've looked at the grant. I've looked at the materials. That's not what the grant is for, and that's not what the work would be for. And frankly, we would never authorize such a grant to any organization to promote any kind of religion. As the ranking member discussed, this was actually to fulfill a requirement that this committee put forward to defend people who are being persecuted for their beliefs. Governments across the world, as you know, are cracking down, can torture people, lock people up for their religious beliefs.
So you're saying today that no $500,000 grant for atheism in Nepal or divided up in other areas?
I have seen no evidence of any grant to promote atheism in Nepal.
Are you familiar with those that you sent to our committee to answer questions about this grant?
I am.
Okay, and are you familiar with that they answered 140 times over that they just didn't know? They weren't the decision makers on this. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think you have to, I'll tell you what I've done. I've looked at the materials that this grantee in Nepal has used. It was about supporting civil society in Nepal so that they could defend themselves if they were persecuted for believing a particular religion.
Which religion?
Or frankly, non-religion. It wasn't religion specific. It was frankly agnostic. It was giving people the right to be safe from persecution, which is exactly the intent of the law.
Let's go back to the original question. Again, as senior State Department personnel, would it be appropriate for the State Department to authorize $500,000 grant of the monies of we the people of the United States of America to promote atheism?
It would not be appropriate to have a grant to promote any religion or non-religion coming from the United States. That's not what the International Religious Freedom Office does. It's not what our Office of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor does.
Very good. So, Mr. Durakoğlu, would you like to respond to that as well? Would it be appropriate to give a $500,000 grant to promote atheism in Nepal?
No, it would not be, and I concur with the deputy's statements. Could I add a data point to that? You mentioned that the individuals who came up from our Religious Freedom Office were continually saying, I don't know, on a number of issues. These are, I believe, the same individuals that are being requested for transcribed interviews. To be clear, we are actually offering up the individual who would know, the senior officials. So just to be clear from earlier statements, we would like to provide the senior official who actually is in charge of this issue to
We
the
would
committee.
love for you to provide that, but let's not just talk about senior officials. Do you have a problem with providing individuals that are not senior officials?
It does send a chilling effect, Mr. Chairman, whenever you have grant administrators.
Be more
or-
specific, chilling effect.
So, for example, if I am a relatively junior or mid-level person, and I award grants from the Department of State, and I am at risk of being called before a committee or testifying or transcribed interviews, and that's why State Departments over respective administrations have had a cutoff of Deputy Assistant Secretary or Senior Executive Service to come up and appear before you. We are simply carrying on that tradition. I think it's an important one to protect the workforce, frankly, to protect the morale.
The
and
workforce works for we the people of the United States of America.
Right.
And I would say absolutely there should be a chilling effect for anybody that writes a grant to spend any dollars of we the people of the United States of America, whether to promote atheism in Nepal or whether to do a drag show in Ecuador or promote prostitution in Colombia or whatever it might be. There should absolutely be a chilling effect for any person at any level that goes out there and conducts their work in such a manner.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have a disagreement about the facts. And I don't, because I don't, from what I have seen and what I have reviewed and the transcripts I have reviewed and the grant materials of the organization in Nepal, and I've spent a lot of time in and around Nepal and South Asia, and I know what risk people face. And I think this was exactly the right kind of program to support civil society and protect them from persecution.
Back to the point of this hearing, clearly you disagree with this, but I would say certainly you had plenty of time to prepare for that, given that over the course of 2 years and 10 specific requests for information before your department finally responded with anything, it took you quite a long time to come up with the story that you're presenting to me right now. And the other thing that I would say about that is, as there's a complaint about needing more resources, needing more staff, needing more personnel. Well, imagine if you cut down your workload by 10, by a multiple of 10, how much more manageable it would be if we didn't have to ask you 10 times for everything that we want, whether it's correspondence about a descent cable to which you all gave out public awards to people that were a part of the descent cable, or whether it's for information about a drag shows in Ecuador or grants in Nepal or anything else. You could cut that down by 10x if you responded with quality on the first time.
Mr.
And
Chairman,
now I will recognize Ms. Van Dyne
I will
for
say
her time.
we spent 50,000.
You're not recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the House Committee on Small Business statement for the record. House Committee on Small Businesses Subcommittee on Oversight has been investigating the federal government's censorship of American small business by proxy since the beginning of this Congress. Our concerns began with the release of the Twitter files, when investigative journalists unearthed collusion between the federal government, social media companies, exorbitantly wealthy foundations, so-called nonpartisan fact-checking companies, to censor Americans online. When it was revealed that the State Department, through its Global Engagement Center, I'm glad we're talking about that today, funded the Global Disinformation Index, a company that creates blacklists of American media organizations and ranks them by GDI's perceived trustworthiness and risk, the committee took action. The GDI downranked conservative-leaning companies and bolstered left-leaning organizations, ironically including those who are repeatedly guilty of spreading false narratives. By labeling certain companies as risky and untrustworthy based on their political views, the GDI's ranking system interferes with the ability of conservative-leaning small businesses to earn revenue through viewership and advertising. This is reflected in the GDI's mission statement, which is to remove the financial incentive to create disinformation by issuance of its dynamic exclusion list, which is basically a blacklist disguised by an eloquent name. Advertising platforms are pressured into ending relationship with companies GDI labels as unreliable, thereby demonetizing the disfavored companies and redirecting money and audiences to the media companies that GDI deems worthy. GDI's CEO herself said the dynamic exclusion list had, quote, significant impact on the advertising revenue that has gone to those sites. Two of the conservative-leaning down-ranked businesses, the Federalist and the Daily Wire, which, by the way, are American companies, have joined the state of Texas in a lawsuit against state and GEC to stop the government from actively interfering in the news media market and attempting to render conservative press outlets unprofitable. The complaint alleges that by funding the infrastructure, the development, marketing, and promotion of censorship technology, the government is covertly suppressing the speech of a segment of the American press with whose narrative they disagree. So you're not doing it. You're just paying somebody else to do it. Other organizations funded by the GEC have been caught sending lists of accounts to social media companies that they label as purveyors of disinformation in order to have them removed from online platforms. We now know that American accounts were included in these lists. It is a violation of the GEC's congressional mandate to act against Americans, which you said you're not doing, but we've got proof that you are. They could also not send taxpayer money to third parties to accomplish the censorship they're forbidden from doing themselves. By funding these companies, making it fungible, the GEC is violating the First Amendment by proxy. The federal government cannot circumvent constitutional protections by using private actors to accomplish what the state itself is prohibited from doing. The full extent of the GEC censorship scheme remains unknown, as the GEC has been uncooperative with investigations into where they're sending taxpayer money. Our first letter to state, which asked for information on grants from fiscal year 2019 to present, was not answered for nearly 6 months. Even communications with state legislative affairs team on production schedules have been limited. Responses continue to be incomplete and delayed to this day. The single document that was finally provided in December was a sliver of what was requested, featuring only cooperative agreements instead of all of the grants as asked. And it appears from the numerical system that was used for each award that over 100 cooperative agreements were completely omitted from states' production. And some of the omitted grants are publicly available online, so it's unclear why state did not comply with our request. Further information that was available on usaspending.gov was redacted in states' limited production. These omissions caused the committee to request more information, including the identity of subawardees, to see where states' grant recipients were funneling taxpayer money. When that response also went unanswered, the committee asked for a briefing from a state grant officer to better understand the GEC's grant issuance and oversight process. This is also pertinent to the committee's investigation, given that State Inspector General found that the GEC lacked proper internal controls to ensure contractors did not perform inherently governmental functions. However, that request also went unanswered. So when a memo was sent to members of the committee to update this on their investigation with additional redactions so as to be sensitive to the nature of the information, we finally received a response from State, though it was not the one that we had hoped. When copies of the redacted information appeared in a news article, State wrote the committee a letter authored by you, Ms. Durakoğlu, close enough, a letter threatening to only share information in camera moving forward. This is completely unacceptable and interferes with congressional oversight. Not only are members of the committee entitled to this information, but none of it was classified. So we'll not be deterred by states hedging threats or obstruction, and we look forward to states' full and faithful cooperation moving forward. But in the meantime, we're demanding accountability for states' noncompliance. Can I ask, why did state only provide the committee with cooperative agreements when we asked for a redacted list of all GEC grants? Project grants should have been included, and over 20 GEC project grants are publicly available, and you omitted them anyway. Why?
So Congresswoman, I can take this one. And first off, thank you. My husband's a Small Business Administration employee, so thank you for your work. The work that you referenced by the Global Disinformation Index, if I could just for 1 second.
So the question that I'm asking is, why did you omit records that were publicly made available?
So from our perspective, we did not omit records. We actually did provide a number.
We've got
and
copies.
I
You
do have good
admitted
news.
records that were readily available online. They
And
were
I
not
do have
classified.
good news for you. We actually are ready to make a production to you all next week.
It
as
took you
well.
6 months to get this far, and you're finally able to get us more than one
I
document.
will say the Global Engagement Center is under investigation by 5 separate committees right
Okay.
now.
I yield back. Thank you very much.
But if I
Chairman.
can respond, the Global Disinformation Index that we're talking about, the work that you're referencing happened in 2022. The Global Engagement Center worked with them on a Chinese propaganda project in 2021.
I'm
There's
simply
actually
asking why
no-
we can't get records that we've requested.
You
These
are
records are
next week.
available. Much of it is publicly available, and you have omitted it.
Ma'am, you will get them next week.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
For your questions and responses. Chair now recognizes, again, Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to address again some of the issues that have been brought up in the intervening period since my last round of questions. And one is on this supposed atheism grant, which, Mr. Verma, you are very clear is not the focus of the grant, is not what the money has been spent on. And in fact, I want to just mention that the majority in its investigation of this issue took a transcribed interview, and they have not agreed to actually release the transcript of that interview to the minority, right? So that's one of the TIs that they have not agreed to release to us, number one. Number two, they actually thought it was so important that we look into this, despite the fact that the State Department has been very clear that's not what the money is spent on and that's not the focus of this grant, and the fact that it was a Republican member of this committee that created the law for the grant, that they decided it was important to send 6 staff from this committee, 6, to Nepal and India, and they spent $80,000 to take this trip to conduct an on-site investigation of this issue. Where's the evidence out of that trip? You're going to send 6 members of this committee, staff members, to go investigate this on the ground, and yet we're sitting here asking questions like we know nothing about it. So clearly, this is just political theater, and I apologize that you have to sit here and you have to deal with that. Mr. Verma, what would you say about that?
Look, I appreciate your comments, Congressman Crow, and I am grateful that the chairman is interested in this issue. I am sorry that 6 staff members had to go to Nepal. I care a lot about South Asia. I think about the challenges we have in South Asia, and when I think about what could have been done, there was no stop in Bangladesh to talk about the recent election and human rights. There was no stop in Bhutan to talk about the recent election. There was no stop in Sri Lanka to talk about our competition with China. There was no stop in Maldives to talk about our new potential embassy and our competition with China. No stop in Mauritius to talk about our future of Diego Garcia. I think about the challenges that are coming across our desk each day in and around South Asia, and including with our partners in Nepal. It is not a $500,000 grant. And I will continue to work on this, Mr. Chairman, because I know you care about it. But I think this is indicative of the challenge that we're having, is that the biggest issues that we are facing are real and serious, and we want to engage with them on this committee, as I've talked to Congressman Mills about just recently, about what's happening in Haiti, what's happening around the world, and U.S. interests that are at stake.
I appreciate you pointing out, Mr. Verma, that when oversight goes awry, and becomes more political theater than oversight, that it's not cost-free, right? That takes resources, that takes attention away from really important issues. And on that, there was some discussion earlier about NEOs, non-combatant evacuation operations. And listen, I'll be the first to join with my colleagues when a NEO doesn't go well or there are issues. In fact, I have in the past, and rightfully criticize and press for answers on issues. But I want to provide some important context here too. That NEOs are inherently always really hard. And they're extremely challenging. And one of the ways in which they're challenging, well, there are many. One is the United States of America does not require its citizens to register with the State Department when they travel or live abroad. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we really have no idea, no firm count in any given instance, how many Americans are on the ground in a place.
That's true.
Okay. And number two, when we talk about American citizens, many times we're talking about dual nationals, right? People who are dual national citizens of the United States and maybe the country in question. Is that also true?
It's true.
And is it also true that many of those folks have family members, spouses, partners, or children who may not be American citizens?
Very true. Complex family
Which then
structures.
makes the NEO extremely complicated because you might have somebody with a blue passport, but they're sitting there with their children and others, and there are many layers of analysis here that you have to go through to effectuate a NEO. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Could I also just say that the NEO is not a State Department call? Yes, we sign the letter that goes to the Defense Department requesting the NEO, but it is a whole of government decision that is taken quite seriously.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Crow, and I appreciate your comments about atheism and yours, Mr. Verma. I'm going to get to this just after I recognize Mr. Mills, but just so you know, I do have the grant here. I didn't write it out. We just printed it out, and it says promoting and defending religious freedom inclusive of atheist, humanist, non-practicing, and non-affiliated individuals. And I'll go into that more in just a couple minutes, but apparently in all your investigation over the course of those 10 inquiries, you must not have come across that. Mr. Mills, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome Mr. Crow on any of these evacuations that he'd welcome himself to join. Mr. Verma, you made a comment earlier about the warning of a level 4 situation in Haiti. Knowing that it's that risky, you also understand that there's Department of State and USAID-funded projects with expats still abroad under your funding that are also trapped now. So if you recognize, I'll give you an example, Chemonics International, DAI, Creative Associates, etc. I won't say which organizations, but there's organizations under your funding who has called me and asked for support because they couldn't get the State Department who funds them to help them to get out. Now, I understand your position, and I will let you answer. I apologize, Mr. Verma, I want to get my question out. I understand your position in regards to giving warnings to those in hostile and threatening positions, but these are actual Americans that your programs funded to put them over there that are now trapped and trying to seek a way out.
Congressman, we make it very clear, and we have tens of thousands of grantees around the world, that receiving a grant from the United States is not guaranteed rescue in the event of a challenge. In fact, we want the grantees to have a plan so that they can actually get out. To the extent we can help them, we will try to do that, but it is not an obligation in our contracts. And in fact, we are quite clear, and I think the very good aid partners that we have around the world, all the big NGOs, they know exactly what they have to do to protect and support their people, and we are grateful for the incredible work that they do. And to the extent we can be helpful to them, we will.
That's understood. Now, let me ask this question, and again, I agree with you that maybe we should look at some policy changes, and I hope that you guys can help us with those policy changes and funding requests. I'm all about trying to do funding requests that we could appropriate that would enable us to be able to further support those who do get caught in these conflict, post-conflict, because we see the world is on fire. We see things are not getting better abroad, and we know that. And you've got a tremendous amount of experience, as did the many diplomatic officers who work under you, and my hat goes off to them for their service. I worked with the State Department. I know the hard work that you guys put in every single day. But I can't ignore the facts. when Americans are constantly being left behind, when we can see through the geopolitical analysts, which, by the way, I was one and published over 4 documents and articles on these subjects, and I think you and I have had some discussion on this. I agree with what Mr. Crow said. We can have policy objections, and maybe that's not going to be one of those areas that means obstruction. But it also doesn't mean success, it means failure. And I think that until we actually start coming to a conclusion on how we further support these types of operations, organizations and people like myself are going to continue to have to go over there. The thing that's always very odd to me is that not until political optics go wrong during election years, or the narrative starts to basically work against individuals, do they start taking key actions. Now, last week, Miller said, State Department has no intent, no plan to evacuate. All of a sudden, lo and behold, now they're jumping through hoops to try and get a plane. What changed?
Look, we have to be careful about what we say publicly as well, right? Because you have to guard against the pull factor. You have to guard against people rushing a particular airport or facility. But trust me, we have been watching and working and round the clock on Haiti for months and months and months as the security situation has devolved. We have been in touch with our aid organizations. We have been in touch with the diaspora community here. We have been in touch with missionary organizations to let them know it was time to get people out.
Well, let me ask this question as a posed option, and I'm looking for feedback on this. If the State Department doesn't have the resources or the capacity, capability, even through the help of DSS, mobile training teams, et cetera, why wouldn't the State Department want to work in conjunction in a PPP-like scenario with organizations or individuals such as myself to support us, as opposed to, and maybe not in our situation and scenario, but in others, where the State Department has actually intentionally worked against us to try and get us stonewalled and slow-rolled on approvals? Why wouldn't we want to work together in a more copacetic way?
I think, look, you know, we talked the other night. We were trying to be helpful to you and what you were doing. What you're doing is very, very courageous. If something was to go wrong with your flight, I just want to be honest with you, we'd have to, some combination of the State Department and Defense Department would have to come and help you get out. If your helicopter, if your plane,
But I just want to be
had
clear,
a
Mr.
problem,
Verma. My life is no more valuable than every other American.
You are
And
a
at the end of
member
the
of
day,
Congress. You are-
yes,
it-
elected by the people, and I'm their employee, and I'll never forget that their life's just as important as
I'm
mine.
just saying,
I'm
there's
going
a
to cut you
rea-
both
there's a
off
reality.
right now because votes have begun about 10 minutes ago. I'm now going to recognize Mr. Crow for a closing statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank both of our witnesses for coming in and being candid, fully answering the questions that you were asked, at least those that you were provided the opportunity to answer. And just reiterate again that we have to be really diligent in differentiating policy differences from procedural or claims of obstruction, right? What we have had time and time again in almost all of these instances that you have heard from today, there have been policy disagreements, which are important to have. And I don't shy away from policy disagreements. In fact, this is what we're supposed to do, is internally debate policy disagreements. What I bristle at is when folks take a policy disagreement and they cloak it in a claim of obstruction or lack of good faith in providing information. And I have seen the numbers of documents. I'm one of the members of this committee that actually has attended transcribed interviews. I've read the AAR documents. I've read and reviewed almost everything that has been provided by this committee, or at least laid eyes on it to ensure it was what you represented it to be. And I can tell you that you have consistently jumped through hoops after hoops that have been put before you, some of which you've never dealt with before, given the unique nature of the request coming from this committee. But you have really made every effort to do that. So with that, I just wanted to give both of our witnesses 1 minute of my time to make any last statements of things that you really needed to address that you didn't give the opportunity to address given time constraints. I'll start with Mr. Verma.
Congressman Crow, thank you. Maybe I'll end where I started, which is with enormous respect for the congressional role in foreign policy, in oversight of the department and what we do. And we understand sometimes we will be in tension. We understand sometimes we may not agree, but I think we share an objective in supporting the American people around the world in advancing U.S. interests. You will continue to have my commitment, and I know the Assistant Secretary and the Secretary feel this way, of working with the committee and giving you the information that you need to do your oversight job effectively. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms.
I
Durakoğlu.
completely concur with the Deputy Secretary. And the one thing I would say is, obviously, congressional relations is not exclusive to oversight and investigations. The Deputy Secretary in his opening did mention over 3,500 just briefings across the board. We're obviously more than happy to always accommodate any briefing request, anything else that you all may need. And I hope that folks do feel comfortable reaching out even to me directly or anybody else, because we really do want to have a good relationship. And I will go a step further. I actually think we do have a very good relationship with this committee. So I know sometimes the tone is a little bit different, but if I could just take off my official mask for a second, I actually like a lot of the members on this committee on both sides. I like the staff a lot. We actually do have engagements outside of all of this. And this is actually, I think, for the most part, a model for what congressional engagement on both sides should look like.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I would like to also enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, the language, the statutory language of what was H.R. 1150, the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act.
So ordered.
This was a law that was passed by Congress through this committee in a bipartisan way. Actually, the lead co-sponsor was a member of the majority. And it actually has a language, I'm going to read this language actually, that the State Department is legally obligated to comply with. It says, by inserting, quote, and the specific targeting of non-atheists, humanists, and atheists because of their beliefs, end quote, after religious persecution. So this Congress, this committee in a bipartisan way actually inserted into the law a requirement that certain things be effectuated, that you have had a legal obligation to do so, and you have done so in compliance with the mandates of this committee. So with that, thank you again for coming today, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. I now recognize myself for a closing statement. The ranking member used the term obstruction, and I'm going to use the term obstruction as well, because obstruction is what has taken place in the past, and obstruction is what has taken place today. You sat here, Mr. Verma, and pretended as though you had no idea where the word atheist might have come from in any sort of grant, anything related to Nepal, anything. You had support from the ranking member here about it. Must be crazy thinking that there's something, even went so far as to say, yes, that would not be appropriate for an appropriate use of dollars for the U.S. taxpayer, $500,000 to go out there and fund a grant for atheism. I will insert this into the record as well. United States Department of State, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, funding floor $500,000. And it says right here on the top, defending religious freedom inclusive of atheist, humanist, non-practicing, non-affiliated individuals. But maybe that's just a title. Maybe it's just a general title and not really what it does. But let's read a little bit into it. It says, this is the expected program outcomes. Increased capacity among members of the atheist and heterodox individuals to form, join networks or organizations. Let's go on and look at some more of the intents of it. Creating or strengthening networks of advocates for the diverse communities of atheists. There we go, there's another one. Strengthening the capacity of organizations representing diverse communities of atheists. Different place there. And I don't have time to read all of it, but you did just sit here. You told me just before this in these remarks, told the committee, you have a great deal of respect for this committee. Apparently you have enough respect for this committee to sit here for 5 minutes and adamantly deny that there is anything relating to a grant for atheism in Nepal, when in fact, if you did the smallest amount of research into your own agency, you would have known that it says right there on the front page of the grant request, and then it says more about it on page 2 and page 3 and keeps going about it. So I think that's a good example of the obstruction, to include the 10 times that we had to correspond with you to just try and get anything about that. That's just, as you pointed out, one small grant. Unfortunately, $500,000 is not small to anybody in my community, but small grant compared to what the State Department doles out on a regular basis. And by the way, $500,000, I think the average salary in Nepal over the course of a month is something around $200 a month is the average salary. So $500,000 is a hell of a lot of money in that place. So that's a great example of obstruction. One example of the many that we deal with here. And again, I think it shows your level of respect for this committee actually, because I know people were talking about actually wanting facts. And there's an actual fact. The fact is actually in front of you. I notice you're not making eye contact with me anymore at this point.
I'm happy to
You're not
respond.
recognized at this point. We're in closing statements.
Thank you.
So in that, members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. You can count on additional questions about this, and absolutely, members of the State Department that were involved in that should certainly count on what you put forward as a chilling effect. People should be chilled about writing grants like that. They would be appropriately feeling what I would expect them to feel if they feel chilled by writing grants like that. So good choice of words there, and we'll ask you to expand on those in writing. In that, pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations without objection of the committee. The committee stands adjourned.
All right, off we go. Another one.
That's another one.